just reminds you like vision and like doing shit that hasn't been done is hard. Like people don't always see, and that's why I think, entrepreneurs, creative people, like creativity isn't just creative.
So we hope you enjoy listening to this podcast half as much as we enjoy making it for you. Because we had a ball. Only real content is going to last. All that other nonsense is here today and gone tomorrow.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Navigating Now. It is your host, Des Cole, followed by our lovely host, Jay Bartlett. And today we have a really special one for you guys. I'm actually going to let him introduce himself a little bit because he has so many titles. I don't know which one to choose quite. But today we have Adrian Nyman on the podcast. Adrian, how you doing? Please let the people know a little bit about yourself.
Hey, yeah, so thanks for having me. Yeah, I've had a few different titles and things I've done, but I guess, most recently I was a VP creative director at Nike. And then I've recently joined as leading the brand marketing organization for an EV vehicle company out of the UK called Arrival. So those are kind of the two probably most current kind of jobs. But I would say previously I was just basement garage level entrepreneur trying to just make things happen and figure out how to, I don't know, just get through this life in a way that made me happy and just try and get stuff done. So I think first and foremost, that's probably my main title is just, you know, trying to build brands, trying to connect with people. But now I've just recently been doing, well, not recently, the last like 15 years, been doing that for other brands. So yeah, nice to meet everyone and thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to have you on as well. And you kind of segue into our first topic. I wanted to ask you, um, what inspired you to be an entrepreneur before you started working at Nike? I know that you had your own company. Can you go a little bit more into the motivations and the affects that kind of came out of that experience?
Yeah, man. So like I grew up, moved around a ton as a kid. It was totally super challenging for me academically. Like I really had a hard time in school, and I really didn't think I had a future in anything, to be honest. And not to sound negative, but I think a lot of people just kind of wrote me off as just kind of this creative kid that really, probably was just going to have some menial job or whatever. Like, and I was kind of just like, I didn't even realize there were jobs that were creative. Like when I was growing up, I didn't even know that was an option. So when I kind of got a little bit older in like my teens and like high school, I just got super into skateboarding. And I felt like for the first time, I met a bunch of people that didn't actually like have a right or wrong way to do something. Like my whole life, I had seen like team sports and school and all these things were like, this is the only way to do something. And then I basically got into skateboarding and I was like, dude, this is an amazing community of people who just make it up. Like you make up your own tricks, you make up your graphics, there's no right or wrong way. And I all of a sudden like a light bulb just went off where I was like, I want to be a part of this culture. I want to do shit here. I want to do my own brands. And so I just started doing board graphics and t-shirts and like the local skate shop. And I had some friends who were turning pro and they were like, yo, I need a graphic. So I was like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. So I was super hungry just to get like involved in anything. And that's your best motivation, for anyone out there that's listening, that's like, doesn't feel like they fit into like the 9 to 5 corporate, whatever world, the mainstream world. Like you gotta find like that thing that you really care about. For me, it was skateboarding at the time. But to be honest, it was more than skateboarding because it was really creativity and art and skateboarding was really like the vehicle that showed me those skills and those abilities actually have a huge opportunity in life. Like I said before, I was like, just, I didn't know I could even have a job. Like I literally thought like the only thing that people who were creative could be was an artist. And I literally was like, well, I'm probably not going to be like Andy Warhol or Picasso, or those are like my ideas of successful artists, right? I didn't even realize that you could be a creative director, or you could be a graphic designer, which ultimately means be a brand builder, right? So yeah, that's kind of like the pre story. But to shorten it up, I got into skateboarding, started doing stuff for people in the industry, and then from there, just started doing my own brands, like literally like printing the shirts myself, like just figuring everything out real time, like no clue what I was doing, which to this day I think is the best way. Like I've met people who are like the most talented, and I met the same level person who never went to any school who are equally as talented. So I'm not saying don't go to school. School's awesome. If I could go back in time and I knew there was a school for the kind of shit I was into, I would have done it in a heartbeat. But I also know like following your passion is more important than checking a box. So yeah. So I mean, and that's honestly, that's what I appreciate about what you guys are doing. Like when Jay first kind of hit me up, and I was just, I don't know, I saw a lot of what I was doing that, when I was your age, kind of in how you guys were trying to approach things. And I just thought, I'm down to whatever, be a, give you my point of view if that's helpful, or just listen to what you're saying. And it's been cool to kind of get to know you guys and what you're up to.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, just like, because I feel almost like the same way. Like I didn't really know until a few years ago that really like there are people that actually just do the creative ideas, and that there's actually other people that can execute
Right.
teams, and that there's actually people that just do the creative part for the, what I'm saying, are responsible for that. Like I just kind of found that out. So that's just kind of really cool to hear you say, just because that's really the whole goal, is just give back after you kind of made your path. But obviously,
go
ahead.
Because when you were talking about why you got into entrepreneurship, you kind of started with explaining the skate culture, but what attracted it was like there aren't like I make the rules. There isn't a set way of doing things, and it's kind of like I feel like there's a job description, right? But when you go entrepreneurial, it's completely open waters, right? You give yourself the license to make all those decisions. And I think I just wanted to like go back and hit on that because that was really
no, that's it. I mean, the beauty, look, you're either born with it or you're not. And people who have that hunger to be an entrepreneur, to go into the unknown, that's what it's all about. I mean, it's about the what if, like it's about like, what if I did this? What if we could do this? Like those are like the rocket fuel in your brain that just make you try things that, starting a brand is seriously one of the, if a realistic, pragmatic person weighed out all the pros and cons and like the potential of success for starting a brand, they would never do it, because it's just a long shot. But the entrepreneur just doesn't see it that way. They see it as all potential. They don't see the negative. And it's that kind of, I think it's that kind of blind passion that leads you to do those things that other people won't. There's a crazy interview like years ago that I heard that kind of resonated with me. So Francis Ford Coppola, the famous movie director, You know, he made in his, you know, he made Apocalypse Now, right? It's a seminal movie, and it's like pretty much almost killed him, right? And this interviewer was like, "Hey, would you ever do a movie at that level again?" And he's like, "No way, because when you're young and you're passionate, you'll do dumb stuff. And now I'm too old to like just be naive enough to take those risks."
Right.
But you know what, that being naive and being optimistic about what could be leads you into some crazy shit. And you know, the product,
Yes.
whatever it is, if it's a movie, a brand, a pair of shoes, whatever, an app, it could be anything. The product can be infinitely, it could be anything because you're not limited. So
To segue, so we know that obviously you worked with a whole bunch of brands and probably tens of 20s and a whole bunch of brands.
yeah,
But you made your way to Nike.
sure.
What was like, at what point in your journey was that? Was that something you wanted to do? Can you explain kind of how that came about?
Yeah. For me, it was always about learning, you know, like I said, sorry, it's my wife trying to call me. For me, I was always, like I said, you know, hey, I wasn't very good in school and all these things, but that, I don't want to confuse that with like, so academic and intelligence they aren't the same thing. And I was super hungry for knowledge and super hungry to learn. I just couldn't do it in the kind of organized school system, right? So I learned through all the people I worked with and all the people I experienced. I was always like trying to understand what they knew, trying to like translate that to how I could use that. Like I was a student secretly. I was like a secret student of every smart person I ever met. And when I had the chance to go to Nike, I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to work with the best people in the world. And honestly, I was like, I'll do it for 2 years and then go back to doing my own thing because I didn't like the idea of working for you know, a company. I wanted to do my own stuff. But I knew Nike and I was such a fan of Nike. On one level, it was just like super fan. On the second level, I was like, I'll work with the best people in the world and I'm gonna just absorb as much of that as I can. And I just thought, you know, I'll bounce in 2 years and I'll go back to doing whatever brand I want to do. And you know, that turned into like over 10 years. So, you know, it's uh it's it's really addictive when you get around big projects like that with amazing people and you just, you know, it's amazing when you do something and you see that, if it's a shoe or a product or a campaign or a store, whatever it might be, you see that kind of land in the public's mind and all of a sudden it just like ripples through the world and all of a sudden you see people just doing shit with it that you could have never imagined, like responding in ways, and becomes so much bigger than you. That's the funnest part for me, is like seeing an idea take its own life, take on a new meaning that I couldn't have intended, like seeing people style a shoe a way that you never thought like somebody would rock it, seeing, you know, like that's the most exciting part about Nike, was the scale that it afforded you to push an idea into the world. And then you would just see it mutate and turn into some shit you could never imagine, which was, for me, was like really dope. And it also taught me you don't know everything. Like you're not gonna like predefine every outcome. And if you try and do that, you're probably missing a lot of cool shit that you could actually, you know, everything's a feedback loop, right? So you put something out there, you see what someone else does with that, and then you take it back and do something different with it. And that's the cycle where you end up with new creative things that you can't get to that if you think, okay, ABC equals X and that's the only way it can go. Like if you get caught in those kind of rigidity, you're limited.
Right. Now we want to get into some of the projects that you were able
Sure.
to do at Nike, but before you mentioned something about, and it made me curious because I've never heard someone explain it like that. But you kind of mentioned the addictive nature of creating.
Oh, yeah.
Was that something that you were aware of, like while you were doing it, or is that kind of like as you look back, you're like, wow, I was kind of addicted to?
I think I mean, I think I've always been aware of it because I was so driven by like wanting to do shit, even when it was on a small scale. Like, like those, whatever, doing my first skateboard graphic was like as exciting as doing like an Air Max shoe. You know what I mean? Like, there are just different points in my life. But I think like later in life, when I kind of reflected on working at Nike and some of the things, I think I realized that it was like, you want more of that. You know what I mean? Like, it
Like
motivates you.
that new idea feeling, and especially
Yeah.
I couldn't even imagine what it feels like to like see the entire world like grab that idea and like love it, that product or whatever that.
Yeah, man, it's crazy.
It's so amazing.
It's crazy, man. And let me just add to that. It's like, I don't want to like, look, Nike, like I said earlier, I went to Nike to learn from the best, right? Like, I met footwear designers, apparel designers, graphic designers, I mean, business people, so you can't have those kind of earth moving moments without like a full squad, right? Like, and that's another thing I learned is like, you, you gotta be able to lean on your partners in ways where it's like, even like Jordan came and spoke to our leadership group once. That's another amazing thing at Nike. You get like people like Michael Jordan coming and talking to like a group of people, and Jordan basically told a story about like how his team dynamic with Pippen and Rodman, like they had to give Dennis, like in the beginning of the game, they had to like back off and let him get like a few rebounds so he could settle into the game in a way where they could really operate as a high team. And that was an amazing story to me because Jordan could do it all if he wanted. Like but he realized that like, he said like, you can't hold a basketball with one finger. You need five fingers to hold the ball. That was an amazing analogy because you can't do it alone. You need your teammates, your partners to do something like at that scale, right?
Absolutely. That's something that we're really big on is collaboration and wanting to figure out kind of like new ways to work together. Because I think going back to what we were saying before, an entrepreneurial kind of mindset, you can kind of make things up as you go, make new things. Like you can collaborate with like independent contractors and have relationships that way, or even other people that own other businesses.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a lot about who you know and like how you can kind of get the right people together to get the idea.
Value.
But I wanted to ask kind of from like a logistic standpoint from somebody that might be listening and wants to be in a position like you working at a top brand like Nike or Adidas or whatever in a creative role. Like what gave you that license to create within Nike? Like what steps do you think got you into that position or that role?
I would say like I always thought of things like holistically. I know that sounds kind of like, what are you talking about? Like when I thought of and that makes sense to like, if I say to you, think holistically, you're like, yeah, end to end from start to finish, the whole world of my idea. Like that's just how you think. And that's the right way to think. But sometimes when you come into like a big corporate culture where there's 70,000 employees, things get siloed and broken up, and it's hard for people to think beyond their piece of the puzzle. And for me, I just always thought of like, the idea in it all encompassing, right? I never like kind of just stayed in like the one piece of it that I was working on. I always thought of it as, you know, what's the experience of the idea? What's the look, the color, the vibe, the retail, the app, the campaign? Like because that's how I'd always thought about ideas. I never thought about them like I'm just designing a campaign or I'm just designing a piece of apparel. I thought about it like, yeah, man, of course there's a retail execution of this. Of course there's
Exactly.
a video, you know?
Right. It's hard to explain unless you do it.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
You know, like, because like, I don't know, I think it's just some that people are like, you're just born with it or you're not, one of those things. But also it can be learned just in the context of like working with a bigger company and then realizing, oh, this idea does have all of these different applications.
Yep.
And like you can then see the width and the depth of even just one product.
Yeah, and I would say just like that, you know, like what made me kind of successful at Nike was I never worked within my job title. Like if I was, you know, like if I was in brand, I was thinking about product. If I was in product, I was thinking about brand. And like I tried to do that in a way that didn't make people feel like I was encroaching on their space. But, you know, I think when people can see the full vision, it just gives people more confidence. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean like I'm trying to, you know, if I'm on the brand side, I'm trying to design the shoe or the apparel item or vice versa, but it just means I'm like helping maybe articulate the idea at a higher level where all the pieces can come together. And that's not always asked for, but I always tried to do that just because that's how I saw it. So it was easy for me to do that. But, you know, there were lots of people who, you know, just did their one task and they were the world's greatest whatever. But for me, that kind of made me stand out a little bit was I always kind of did a little more work, a little more. I just lived outside of the ask, you know, when somebody asked for X, I gave them X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? And maybe it all didn't get used and maybe they were just like, that's cool, but no, thank you. But I was like, at least I'm going to show you, like, at least I'm going to stretch this idea. And that ended up helping me a lot as I kind of tried to make a name for myself or, you know, just stand out, I guess.
Right. Again, kind of going to your journey, like in the beginning with Nike, like what was that like when you initially received that opportunity? Like, can you take us kind of through that experience?
Oh yeah, man. You know, so I came into Nike, there's like, I've been super lucky to have some like really amazing mentors and none of them would call themselves a mentor to me. I never asked them to be a mentor, but they just looked out for me and told me things and I was willing to listen to them. And they were older than, you know, these are like older, you know, to me at the time, they were like old people like I am now, right? But I was lucky to have some people like that. And one of them was, you know, he is like a high level dude at Nike. He's like a executive, like Mark Parker's kind of inner circle dude. And he's the one who really opened a lot of these opportunities for me. And, you know, I'm really like lucky that he saw something in me that maybe I didn't even see in myself. And a great example was another kind of leader at Nike who was pretty up there was this woman, Jean Jackson, and she kind of led all of the Nike direct business at the time. She's like really amazing, super, probably like one of the smartest people I ever met. And I worked on this kind of multi-concept retail store for Nike called Salvation. Before that, it was like a concept store called 227. And it was basically like an action sports, like it was Nike SB, it was Hurley at the times they owned Hurley, and it was Converse. And this woman, Jean Jackson, who had just come in to be the president of Nike Retail and Nike Direct, she saw that concept that I did, and she was kind of like, got to know me a little bit. And she's like, why don't you come and work in Nike's retail section group or whatever? And I was like, well, I'm not a retail person. Like I didn't think of myself as a retail person at all. Like I thought of myself as like an apparel designer that happened to be doing this little retail concept, right? And she's like, why don't you come and join this team up working on Nike retail? And I was like, yo, I'm not a, it was just like one of those things where she's like, I see it different. She's like, I think you are. And I'm, this is somebody who had been, she's like had been the CEO of like Banana Republic. Like she had been in a huge retail organization. She was like maybe like top retail person in the world at the time. And she's like, no, I think you are. And I had to like think about that for a minute. And I was like, well, maybe I am. You know what I mean? Like, why am I limiting myself to just think I'm a, one thing? Like if this person thinks I can do this, then maybe I can. So I did it. And, I did a couple of years in retail. It was amazing. And, from there, I kind of went back into apparel, and then I went, I just kind of jumped around. But I guess the point of my story is don't kind of pigeonhole yourself as one thing. Like, and when there's people who have done a lot of stuff and they see something in you, you should trust them. Like, there's so many examples of that in my life where I'm like, I still catch myself to this day, like reminding myself to not limit like what what opportunities or what things I can be a part of. You know what I mean?
Right. And one of those projects that you were a part of that kind of completely took over the world was Nike Tech.
Oh yeah.
So just like as a fan, really, like I really right now, matter of fact, I want to know how we got here. Like, what was the inspiration? Like, did the joggers come first? How did we get the fabric? Like,
the stitch patterns, like what was
the different sidelines? Yeah, just like I want to know about Nike Tech.
Yeah, so it's this is a crazy story. Like I said earlier, like Nike, like there's not just one person doing it. So I'm very humbled to be a part of that as one of many to bring that to life. But let me break it down. It's it took vision and it took creative vision from the business, from design, from creative. And, it really started, if you really want to know I'll tell you the super long story, but years before Tech Fleece came out, there was a small capsule collection in NSW called Tech Pack. And Tech Pack was like kind of technical classics remix. They were really dope. And that kind of like came out, didn't really blow up, but it was really cool. And then it kind of went on the back shelf. And then when Tech Pack, Tech Fleece and all that came out, basically the business was like, how do we grow fleece? Like fleece is like the biggest classification in the athletic world, right? Like sweatshirts and joggers, and that's like for any athletic company, that's the foundation. But up to that point, like fleece was like hadn't changed in like 100 years. It felt like it was just like basic, fleece. Right. It was like cotton poly, just and at the same time we were doing a small collection called Made in Italy in Sportswear, which was really, really, really expensive, like tiny distribution. Like in New York, you get it like Mercer and a few spots. That was it. And the apparel team that was working on that had brought back this crazy spacer mesh fleece, which had this really like rigid, like it really held its body really great. And that's where the fabric came from. It came from the Made in Italy collection. And then, but that was so small, it didn't have any scale. So this guy, Joe Serino, who really was like the business visionary behind NSW, he led all the product engine. He was like, there's something in this fabric. And then a couple other people, Charlie Holmes, who's the design director at the time, like everyone was just like, there's something in that. It's got this really interesting hand, it's modern, and that's where it grew from, that one kind of niche piece and Made in Italy. And then it got, the original collection was like 5 silhouettes. It wasn't just one thing. It was an N98 track jacket. It was the AW77 kind of hoodie. It was the jogger. It was a crew. And literally, like, it was all one fabrication. It was just a couple iconic silhouettes. And like, we didn't have a name or anything. It was only until like the last minute where it was like, what do we call this? And that's where we took the old name Tech Pack and put it, kind of repurposed that name for this collection. And then it was like way more expensive. It was like 30% more expensive than normal fleece. There was like a lot of like crazy things about it where we presented that collection. This is kind of like behind the scenes story, but at Nike, you kind of take your collection every season, you kind of present it to Nike's kind of like merchants and the buyers, if you will, right? Like Nike's kind of like its own world where it has its own buyers that buy for its stores, and they're not buyers, but you know what I mean. And so we did this big presentation, and people were like, nah, it's too expensive. Like a lot of people didn't like embrace it. Wow. It was kind of like, yeah, it was kind of like it was very polarizing. A lot of people in the company were kind of like, yeah, I don't know. And to NSW's leadership, like Joe Serino and some of those people, they're like, fuck it, we're making it. Like, and so, you know, it was like a real great example of like, everyone saying you can't do that, it's too expensive, it looks weird, like they hadn't seen something like that before, like what's these big zippers, and you know, it really came down to like, we're just like, we believe in it, you know what I mean? So kudos to Joe and the business, and they got it placed in like some Nike direct doors, you know, just some Nike owned doors, and dude, it blew up. I mean, it just went like, people on the street saw it and just went, yeah, more of that. And it's like, you know, to this day, I still look at that example of like, you know, there's a famous quote from Henry Ford, right? You might have heard this. Like, you know, Henry Ford was like, hey, if I asked, you know, people what they wanted, go back to, you know, Henry Ford days. He's like, if I asked people what they wanted, they'd tell me faster horses. They wouldn't have said a car, right? They wouldn't have said an automobile. They would have said, just give me a faster horse that maybe, you know, doesn't need as much food, right? Like, and so I think it just reminds you, like, vision and like doing shit that hasn't been done is hard. Like, people don't always see. And that's why I think, you know, entrepreneurs, creative people, like, creativity isn't just creative. Like Joe Serino, the guy who led the product engine and the business, was an amazing creative person, right? So creativity is like across everything, especially when you're talking about having a vision and doing something that hadn't been done. And you gotta like overcome the no's. There's gonna be a lot of no's. Like, people are just like, nah, I don't think so. Nah, I don't like it. You got to kind of just be tenacious and just kind of persevere. So yeah, I mean, that was an amazing project. I mean, it was super satisfying to be a part of that, and to, you know, to play a role. It definitely, you know, there's a couple projects at Nike that were, you know, kind of breakthroughs that you kind of, you know, like I was saying earlier, you kind of see the world. All of a sudden you're like in Tokyo and there's like 1 million people wearing this thing, and you're just like, damn, it's crazy. And, you know, you see like freaking Vogue magazine, style it with like a, you know, like a dope camel top coat with like tech fleece and like, you know, you just see super cool shit where you're like, I never like in my wildest dreams would have seen this thing, like just, and it's really satisfying, you know?
Yeah, no, that's I love to hear that whole behind the scenes. That's a really cool story. Actually, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, that was really cool.
And I will say we don't have a ton of time left, so I kind of want to like ask some almost like rapid fire questions
Sure, let's do it.
so we can get through it. So after tech, I know that another huge project that you worked on is the House of Innovation.
Yep.
And could you just quickly touch on like what was your role in that project and like kind of
Sure.
your preparations for that?
Yeah, so I was the head of creative for all Nike retail at the time. This is the second time I was in retail. So basically, you know, we had the opportunity, like retail had gotten a little tired, a little played out, like it had just become kind of transactional, you know, like stores were just kind of like places to just go get product, you know. It wasn't really about an experience. It wasn't really interesting in a respect that it really made you like feel like you were a part of like some cool story. And so we basically were like kind of given the opportunity to reset kind of the flagship experience for Nike, which is at the time would have been all the Nike talents. That was the old flagship experience, which had, you know, been around forever, but it hadn't really updated in a long time. So they were like, let's reimagine like our flagship stores. And so for me, it was super simple. I'm like, you know, like when people came to Nike, we would take them, like it could be an athlete or like a retailer or like press, it could be whoever. If they come to the campus, sometimes they get a tour of the innovation kitchen, which was where we made, you know, tested all the product, where we did like a lot of sports research, where we just experimented. And it was kind of like Nike's kind of secret mad scientist lair. And anytime people got a little peek into that zone, I mean, it's definitely like highly sensitive stuff, but anytime people kind of got a glimpse into that world of Nike innovation, like the process of making shit, they would lose their mind. Like they would go crazy. Like, oh my God, like this is the coolest thing. So for me, I was like, the brief was simple. Like I basically went back and just said to like the leadership in Nike, because we needed to get the money to fund it, right? So we had to tell them what it was. You know, we had to go, here's the concept. And I was basically like, dude, let's just do that for the rest of the world. Like, let's give the rest of the world the experience we give these people when they come to our campus. Like, let's turn the berm inside out and like, let's just like bring that innovation kitchen idea to 4 stories in Manhattan. You know, let's bring it to Paris. Let's kind of create like retail that isn't just about how many shirts you can fold on a table or how many sweatshirts you can fit on a rack or how many shoes you can fit on a wall. Let's actually storytell around the shit that we're passionate about as a brand, right? Which is innovating for athletes. And so that was the basic idea. And I mean, I don't want to, you know, again, like I'm a humble piece of a much bigger team that, you know, all over the world. I mean, it's like, you know, 200 plus people that probably worked on all that stuff. And I was lucky enough to kind of get to champion those ideas and to work with the business to kind of put a look and a feel and a name and an attitude to what the flagship experience could be. That was bigger than just buying something. Like retail, you don't need a store anymore. You can, if you want to buy a pair of AF1s, you can go on your phone a lot easier lying in your bed at night than getting up and taking a train to a store or driving or walking in the rain. Like, so you don't need a physical store. So for me, it was simple. It was like, just turn Nike inside out and share our passion and make it a cool cool experience that people want to go and see and take a picture and be a part of and hear those deep stories behind the product that, you know, how did the Vaporfly shoe come to be? Like, there's just so much cool shit.
Right.
That was pretty easy for me, like from an idea standpoint.
Right.
You know, and the name House of Innovation actually came from dude, this is the net, like, so, you know, I talked about Tech Pack as an old name that got recycled. House of Innovation actually was a brand activation. It was literally like during the Beijing Olympics, there was like a brand activation called House of Innovation. And it was, you know, so it's kind of amazing because it was already a part of the brand history, and we just brought it back. We were like, let's just call it what it is. Like, we don't need to like come up and some random obscure name. Like, let's just be what it is. And that's, I don't know, man, that's kind of the story. But it was one of the coolest things. I was in Shanghai when the store, like the first flagship opened. We did 3 in like a year and a half. We did New York, Shanghai, and Paris. And yeah, man, I just remember them, like kids were camped out like all night long and there were thousands of people outside. And I just remember standing inside and seeing them open the doors and just have all these like kids just like rush the store, like just go crazy, just running like everywhere. And like, I just was standing there with Andy and some other people from my team. And it was like, it was just crazy goosebumps, like just to see like this thing you've worked so hard on all of a sudden, like, it's like you giving it to the world and they're just like, just going crazy. And yeah, it was cool, man. I bet there's like, you know, like some young 12-year-old, 14-year-old kids that like that moment probably will be burned in their brain the same way when I was 14 and I went into a skate shop and saw this world of skateboarding that I didn't know about. And I was like forever burned in my brain. So it's exciting to think like I got to be a part of something that maybe influenced people when they were kind of at that moment in their life where, you know, maybe gave them some kind of interest or excitement or whatever.
I'll raise my hand. It affected me. That store is so cool. Just like the fact, like what you said about just like being able to see behind like how the fly knits were made is like, totally. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. I mean, like, there's just, yeah, there's so much amazing. Nike's like one of the raddest brands for a million reasons, but like their passion for making athletes better, like that's when Nike's at its best, it's just doing that. And then cool shit just comes from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not to overly simplify it, but yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff like that. Hey, I'm super stoked I could do this with you guys.
Yeah,
hopefully
we know.
have given you some
gems for
entertaining
sure.
stories.
Trust me, yes, you did.
Yeah, for sure. Now I know you have to wrap up. Just I guess my last 2 questions are, because we want to tie back into our brand. What is your definition of different? What does it mean to you to be different? And who would you like to see on next as a guest?
Jeez, those are a tough question. You know, my idea of different is like, I think it's just being confident in, I don't want to, look, sometimes the things that in your life that seem hard and difficult and maybe feel like disadvantages, like when I was growing up, I had dyslexia, it was a learning disability, like, and that shit, those adversities actually made me who I am, and they made me really good at creative because I wasn't good at like academics and reading and writing. So I'd say me for different, what makes me different is, this sounds weird, but like having like adversity and challenges, and those things will make your brain rewire and do things that make you distinctive. And you know, if you want to be successful in the world, I think you got to find your own path. You know, you can't just do the same stuff that the person next to you is doing, because then you don't stand out. So for me, that would probably be my answer. Kind of a long-winded answer. Who would be on the show next? Who would be a great person on the show? I don't know, Phil Knight. That'd be a good one.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I'm not that legit to.
you can pull it, all right.
No, I'm not that connected. Not that connected, but he's amazing. He's an amazing individual and speaker, and he's pretty dope.
Yeah. All right, Adrian. Well, we really appreciate your time today. I know you got to go, but you gave a lot of gems for everybody to listen to and watch. A lot of inspiration. Thank you for your time today. It's great having you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And yeah, man, look forward to seeing what you guys get into. Again, thanks for the time, and thank you everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, guys.
Peace.